He was one of the wealthiest men in the state, worth hundreds of millions, with properties across 3 cities and a name that commanded respect in every room he entered. But one morning, he packed a single bag, put on worn-out clothes, and walked out of his mansion to live as a homeless man on the streets. Not because he had lost everything, but because he was tired of never knowing if anyone truly loved him for who he was. What happened over the next several months would test his faith in people, expose the worst of human greed, and lead him to the one person he never expected to find. This is the story of a man who gave up everything he had to find out if love without money was even possible. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. His name was James Whitfield, and he had spent 40 years building a real estate empire that stretched from Atlanta to Charlotte to Nashville. He started with nothing, raised by a single mother in a small apartment in Georgia, working jobs after school to help pay rent. His mother taught him the value of hard work, of showing up, of never asking for what you hadn't earned. James carried those lessons into adulthood, channeling them into a relentless drive that eventually made him extraordinarily successful. By the time he was in his 50s, James had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He had a beautiful home in a gated community, a private plane, a collection of luxury cars, and a social calendar full of events, galas, charity dinners, business conferences. He was surrounded by people constantly. And yet, sitting alone in his living room on a Tuesday night, with the silence pressing in from all sides, James realized something that made his chest ache. He was one of the loneliest men alive. James had been married once, in his 30s, to a woman named Patricia. Patricia was beautiful, charming, social. She loved the lifestyle his money provided, the vacations, the designer clothes, the invitations to exclusive events. But she never seemed particularly interested in James himself, in his thoughts, his fears, his dreams. When his business hit a rough patch in the early years and he told Patricia they might need to cut back for a while, she became distant, cold, irritable. When the business recovered and the money came back, she returned to her warm, affectionate self. James noticed, but said nothing, not ready to face what it meant. The marriage ended after 7 years when James discovered Patricia had been having an affair. She left without much regret, taking a generous divorce settlement and returning to her social circle. James buried himself in work after that, telling himself he didn't need anyone. But the loneliness built up slowly, year by year, until it was impossible to ignore. After Patricia, James dated occasionally. Women were drawn to him, but he was never sure if they saw him or his net worth. He became skilled at reading people's motivations, at noticing when someone's interest sharpened after they learned the name of his company or the address of his home. He started keeping people at a distance, not wanting to repeat the mistake of Patricia. But distance is its own kind of suffering. By his late 50s, James had a network of acquaintances who admired him and called when they needed favors, but he couldn't name a single person who truly knew him. His business partner, a man named Gerald, was friendly and professional, but fundamentally transactional. His siblings called on holidays. His mother had passed away 6 years earlier, and with her death, James had lost the only person who had ever loved him completely and without condition. The grief of that loss had never fully healed. It sat in him, quiet but constant, like a stone in his chest. It was during one of those long, quiet evenings that James came up with his idea. He had been reading an article online about a wealthy man in India who had reportedly disguised himself as a poor man to test the character of the woman he was considering marrying. The story resonated with James in a way he didn't entirely understand at first. He read it twice, then sat back and stared at the ceiling. What would happen if he did something similar? Not to test a specific woman, but to understand human nature more broadly. To see how people treated someone with nothing. To find out if genuine kindness still existed, if there were people out there who would offer help without expecting anything in return. And maybe, somewhere along the way, to find someone who could love a man, not a bank account. The idea seemed crazy at first. He dismissed it, went to bed, got up the next morning and thought about it again. The more he thought about it, the more it made a strange kind of sense. He was tired of his life as it was. He was tired of the performance, the social obligations, the hollow interactions. He wanted something real, even if it was just for a little while. James spent 2 weeks planning. He met with his lawyer and business partner Gerald, telling them he was taking an extended leave of absence for personal reasons. He set up automatic systems to manage his business operations in his absence. He transferred a small amount of cash into a separate account, just enough to cover basic expenses if absolutely necessary. He chose a city, Memphis, Tennessee, somewhere large enough that no one would recognize him, but with enough of a street community that he could blend in. He bought second-hand clothes from a Goodwill store, worn jeans, a faded jacket, old sneakers. He left his phone, his watch, his wallet, and his car keys in his house. He packed a single backpack with a change of clothes, a few toiletries, some cash hidden in the lining, and a small notebook. He drove himself to Memphis in a rental car, dropped the car off at the airport, and walked out of the terminal with nothing but the backpack on his shoulders and the clothes on his back. For the first time in decades, James Whitfield was nobody. The first few days were a shock to his system. James had never been homeless, had never had to think about where he would sleep or what he would eat. He spent the first night on a park bench, unable to sleep, listening to the sounds of the city at night, police sirens, distant music, the rustle of leaves. The second night, he found a shelter that offered beds to men without homes. He stood in line for 45 minutes in the cold before getting a cot in a room with 20 other men. The shelter smelled of industrial cleaning products and something harder to name, something like desperation. James lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of men sleeping, coughing, mumbling in their dreams. He had never felt so humbled in his life. The third day, James sat outside a convenience store and watched the world go by. People barely looked at him. Some stepped around him without acknowledgement. A woman with a stroller actually crossed to the other side of the street when she saw him sitting on the ground. A group of teenagers made a comment about his appearance as they walked past, laughing among themselves. James felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: invisibility. But then, something happened that he didn't expect. A man, roughly his own age, wearing clothes as worn as James's, sat down beside him and struck up a conversation. The man's name was Leonard. He had been homeless for 2 years after losing his job and then his apartment during a medical crisis. Leonard was smart, funny, perceptive, and completely without bitterness despite everything he had been through. He told James about the best spots in the city to find food, which shelters had the best staff, which parks were safe to sleep in. He showed James where a church nearby served hot breakfast on Saturday mornings. He did all of this without asking for anything, without expecting anything in return, just because James was there and Leonard was a person who helped. James was moved by Leonard in a way he hadn't anticipated. He found himself thinking about his life back home, about all the people who surrounded him with their hands out, and here was this man with nothing, giving freely. Over the following weeks, James settled into life in Memphis. He got to know the rhythms of the street community, the names and stories of the people who lived there. He helped out at the shelter when he could, washing dishes, helping serve meals, carrying boxes. He made friends, real friends, people who knew nothing about who he used to be and liked him anyway. And he started to understand something important. Wealth hadn't made him a better person. It had just made him better protected. Stripped of his money and his status, James was just a man, with the same needs and vulnerabilities as everyone else. That realization was both humbling and liberating. About 6 weeks into his time on the streets, James was sitting outside a bakery when a woman came out and handed him a paper bag. She said her name was Carol, that she worked in the bakery, and that they always had extra bread at the end of the day that would just go to waste. She had a warm smile, kind eyes, and no agenda. She didn't linger or make a big deal of it. She just gave him the bag and went back inside. James came back the next day, and Carol brought him another bag. They started talking, first briefly, then longer. Carol was 53 years old, a widow whose husband had died of a heart attack 4 years earlier. She had worked in the bakery for 15 years and was saving money to open her own small cafe. She talked about her plans with a quiet excitement that James found deeply appealing. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She was just a woman with a dream and the patience to pursue it. Over the next few weeks, James and Carol talked every evening when her shift ended. She never asked him what had happened to him, never pushed him to explain his situation. She just treated him like a person. James started helping out around the bakery when the owner allowed it, sweeping, carrying deliveries, doing odd jobs. He found himself looking forward to seeing Carol every day in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in years. But there were others who noticed James too, not with kindness. There was a woman in the shelter who had heard he was doing small jobs for pay and kept asking to borrow money, always with a different story about why she needed it. There was a man in the neighborhood who tried to involve James in a scheme to pass off fake goods to tourists, promising he would cut James in for a share. There was even a woman who seemed interested in James romantically, but who he noticed always became particularly warm when he mentioned any kind of small income. James observed it all quietly, filing it away, comparing it to how Carol behaved. Carol never asked for anything. She never positioned herself to benefit from knowing him. She just gave bread, shared conversation, and treated him with dignity. 3 months into his time on the streets, James made his decision. He had learned what he came to learn. He had seen generosity and greed in their most unfiltered forms. He had met Leonard, who gave freely with nothing. He had met Carol, who offered kindness without calculation. And he had confirmed what he had suspected about the people in his old life, that most of them were there for what he could offer, not for who he was. It was time to go back. But before he did, he wanted to tell Carol the truth. He asked her to meet him for coffee at a diner near the bakery. Carol agreed, surprised but curious. When they sat down across from each other, James took a deep breath and told her everything. Who he was, what he had done, why he had done it. Carol listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, there was a long silence. Carol looked at her coffee cup, then back at him. Her voice was measured. So this was all an experiment? James shook his head. It wasn't an experiment. It was the first honest thing I've done in years. And what I found here, the things I learned about people, about myself, about what actually matters, I couldn't have found that in my old life. Carol was quiet for another long moment. Then she asked, "What are you going to do now?" James said he was going back to Atlanta. He was going to change the way he ran his business, the way he treated people. He was going to fund a program to help people like Leonard get back on their feet. And he wanted to know if Carol would consider letting him invest in her cafe. Not as a favor, but as a business partner, because he had spent 3 months watching her work and he believed in her completely. Carol looked at him for a long time. "You know, this is a lot to process." James nodded. "I know. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm just asking for the chance to show you I'm worth trusting." Carol eventually said yes to the investment, though she insisted on formal paperwork, an equal partnership, and the right to buy out his share if things didn't work. James agreed to every condition. He respected her for it. Back in Atlanta, James did exactly what he had said he would do. He restructured his business practices, creating a community development fund that invested in small businesses in low-income areas. He funded a housing assistance program for people in crisis. He hired Leonard, who turned out to have a remarkable talent for logistics, to manage operations for one of his property divisions. Leonard became one of James's most trusted employees, and eventually a genuine friend. Carol's Cafe opened 8 months after James returned to Atlanta. It was a warm, welcoming space in a corner of Memphis that needed exactly that. It became a gathering place for the neighborhood, a spot where people lingered over coffee and felt like they belonged. Within a year, it was thriving. And James, who had spent decades surrounded by wealth and emptiness, found himself sitting in that little cafe on a Saturday morning, watching Carol serve customers with the same warmth she had shown a man in worn-out clothes sitting outside a bakery, and feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. As for James and Carol, their relationship grew slowly, carefully, built on honesty and mutual respect. They didn't rush it. James had learned too much about the value of patience to take anything for granted. And Carol, who had survived loss and rebuilt her life on her own terms, wasn't someone who could be impressed by money or rushed into anything. But she could be moved by consistency, by showing up, by a man who saw her and valued her not for what she could do for him, but for who she was. 2 years after that first coffee at the diner, James asked Carol to marry him. She said yes, and for the first time since his mother died, James felt completely known by someone, not for his money, not for his name, but for himself. The man he had always been underneath everything else, the boy from the small apartment in Georgia, the son of a woman who taught him that what you give always matters more than what you have. So, here's what I want to ask you. Do you think James was right to do what he did? Was testing people by pretending to be poor a form of wisdom, or was it a form of manipulation? And if you were Carol, how would you have reacted when you found out the truth? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective. And if this story reminded you that the way people treat those who have nothing reveals everything about who they really are, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep sharing stories that make you think about what really matters in this life. Next time, I'm going to tell you about a woman who donated a kidney to a stranger and how that one decision connected 2 lives in ways neither of them ever saw coming. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, real love sees the person, not the position.